So WWDC 2025 is a week away, and we have a new teaser and tagline for the event. Apple shows us a glass-like Apple logo with colors shining through, and also the tagline Sleek Peak, which is a clear nod to Vision OS in my opinion. And while this lines up with the rumors, because we are expecting a redesign to iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. And by the way, for those wondering what the next version of macOS might be called, we have rumors it will be called macOS Tahoe, according to Mark Gurman. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but Lake Tahoe is known for its reflective waters, which mirror the surrounding landscape, and so that once again could be a reference to the glass-like interface macOS is going to have, which will be a nod to Vision OS. And by the way, Mark Gurman has told us they're rebranding the number scheme for their operating systems. So instead of iOS 19, we're going to see iOS 26. And it's not just iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, tvOS, Vision OS, and macOS all are going to be branded with 26, which is obviously a nod to the following year, much like the car industry does. And by the way, I may say iOS 19 later in the video, but yeah, it should be called iOS 26. Now let's talk about a software redesign, because not only is iOS, macOS, and iPadOS getting a redesign, but also watchOS and tvOS. And this is not exactly surprising news, because Apple wants to maintain a consistent design language across all their devices, and so the Vision OS aesthetic is coming to all software platforms. That makes sense. We'll talk more about that later in the video, but first, if you want AI shoved in your face in every application you use on your iPhone, I come bearing great news, because Apple will be launching an SDK in iOS 19 that lets developers use Apple's AI models. This means developers can now create new features based around Apple Intelligence features like image playground, writing tools, Genmojis, notification summaries, etc. Since adoption rate for some of these features have been low, and to be honest, I'm not exactly surprised when image playground produces junk like this. These are baby steps though. At the end of the day, Apple is ultimately very behind when it comes to the AI race, and their version of a large language model like ChatGPT or Google Gemini won't launch till 2026 at the earliest. Oof. But you know what, I'd much rather Apple not continue making false promises. It's better they focus on honing Apple Intelligence and making sure everything they promised at WWDC 2024 does pan out first. Now, the power of AI won't only be used in applications, it's also going to fix your battery life issues apparently. This low-key sounds like a scam. Essentially, in iOS 19, Apple plans to launch an AI-powered battery management option that will analyze how you use your device and make adjustments accordingly to cut down on battery usage. There'll also be a new lock screen indicator that shows how long it will take your iPhone to charge, which is a basic feature Android phones have offered for years, but now with the power of Apple Intelligence, we have this on iOS. This new AI battery management feature will allegedly be designed with the iPhone 17 Air in mind, because we've heard that may not have excellent battery life, and so let's see if AI can save that device. Now what's interesting is that all devices running iOS 19 will get this feature. I thought only devices which could run Apple Intelligence would get this, but no, Apple's blessing everyone with better endurance it seems. You know what you could bless me with though? Clicking that subscribe button, of course. It's free and will bring you the latest of Apple right in your subscription box, so please consider it. It would be appreciated. Join the Saranbyte gang now. Gurman also in this new report does say Apple's pushing engineers to make this update more functional and less glitchy, which is good to hear because iOS in recent years has not been very stable. Moving on, if you've ever wanted Apple to offer something similar to Samsung DeX on the iPhone, we have news we could get just that with iOS 19. Leaker Majimbi reports a limited version of Stage Manager could come to iPhones with a Type-C ports, so that's the iPhone 15 and 16 series. Right now, plugging your iPhone into an external display gives you access to a basic form of screen mirroring. Basically, what you see on the iPhone is projected onto a display, and so even a cut-down version of Stage Manager would be a big upgrade. And I know some may say, what is the point of this? Well, for those who want to get some work done, plugging your iPhone into a monitor and quickly getting access to a desktop-like experience would be quite nice. Actually, hypothetically, since M-series chipsets are just beefier A-series chips, iPhones could actually theoretically run macOS. But of course, Apple still wants you to buy Macs, and so we're getting this in-between option with Stage Manager. But as I said, if this turns out to be true, this would be a big upgrade over the current screen mirroring interface. Moving to iPadOS 19, however, Leaker Majimbi reports that iPads could get a menu bar similar to macOS when using the Magic Keyboard. That's a top portion of your Mac that gives you access to quick toggles for the UI and the application you're currently using. Mark Gurman had actually told us Apple's aim this year was to make iPadOS more like macOS, and then said there'll be 3 main changes: improved productivity, improved multitasking, and improved app window management, which is quite a vague list of changes. What does improved productivity even mean? Thankfully, Leaker Mijinbu is more specific and tells us we should see a new menu bar, as well as a seamless version of Stage Manager, which sounds interesting. Maybe the current version of Stage Manager comes to iOS, and iPadOS gets a beefed up version that's more similar to macOS. But I'll be honest, the list of changes people want to see with macOS will be so vast that Apple's just better off putting macOS on the iPad. For example, with improved multitasking and app window management, many would just want Apple to ditch Stage Manager on the iPad and bring the window system macOS has, and so if we're eventually going to get to a point where iPadOS becomes more like macOS, you might as well just throw macOS on the iPads. Another aspect that many would like Apple to change with iPadOS is the Files application, for example. It's not great, and so adding Finder that macOS has to the iPad would be fantastic, and so that's why, again, it's just easier to chuck macOS on the iPads. I know not everyone uses the iPad as a laptop replacement, and so Apple could maybe give us the option we can dual boot iPadOS and macOS. So yeah, I don't see the point in iPadOS 19 slowly becoming more like macOS. And also, let's be honest guys, we hear this every year from leakers. It feels like ever since we saw M1 come to the iPad Pro, we've been waiting for Apple to do something with all this power, but they've been slow to give us any actual new software features. And so I would keep expectations low, guys. iPadOS is already getting a design overhaul, and so I wouldn't be surprised if functionally it's not very different. But if Apple does want to bless us with a meaningful change, please just give us macOS on the iPads. Now let's talk about the redesign coming to iOS 19, because we have new renders that show us the UI overhaul to expect. And as I'd said earlier in the video, this overhaul should apply to iPadOS, macOS, watchOS, and tvOS as well. So earlier, John Prosser had showed us the redesigned camera UI, the new lock screen where the notifications are more translucent, and there's more 3D floating look for the toggles. Settings and pop-ups have a more glassy aesthetic imitating visionOS, and a redesigned keyboard where it almost creates this illusion of it floating. But I'll be honest, I was expecting a bit more, and thankfully John Prosser now shares more renders that show us more drastic visual changes. And namely, we have circular icons in these new renders, which have been taken directly from visionOS. John Prosser actually first told us that in the builds he saw, he couldn't see evidence of rounder icons. However, it seems Apple's been hiding this, because in current builds, if you long press on a squircle icon, it becomes rounder after a brief animation. Maybe Apple's hiding the new icons in builds to prevent leaks, but clearly that plan has not worked because it has leaked, and Tim's now very angry. But I like the look of this. Yes, it's just different shaped icons that don't add any functionality whatsoever, but I'm always down for visual changes that are executed well, and this looks clean in my opinion. Apple could of course give consumers a choice, and similar to Android devices it would be nice if you could switch between squircle and circular icons, but this is Apple talking about they want design consistency, and so I'm expecting everyone to be forced to use these new icons whether you like it or not. But personally, I'm not against that because these new icons are quite nice. Another UI change to expect is a pill-shaped tab bar at the bottom of many of Apple's first-party applications. You can see how it looks, and it seems Apple is going to be prioritizing putting a lot of tabs towards the bottom of the device, which is great for reachability, especially for those using the Pro Max and having to do hand gymnastics right now. Also, Apple is rounding off everything, so if you long press on an app, the menu that comes up is rounder now. There's new sliders for volume and brightness in the control center, and also the settings application has slimmer toggles. There's also a subtle lighting effect to some elements that help create this glass-like appearance, and so for example the flashlight and camera controls on the lock screen shimmer as you move your iPhone. So overall, I actually love this. Yes, I'm an Apple sheep who's quite easily impressed by new fancy icons, but iOS has looked the same for a while, and so I'm glad to see a visual overhaul that will make your iPhone feel fresh. And I know some may argue that we don't need a redesign to iOS, we need stability. In fact, I have a feeling Apple's giving us a redesign in the first place to distract us from the fact Apple Intelligence Siri features have been delayed, and honestly it's a good distraction because whilst AI features in iOS may eventually get useful, they certainly aren't must-have features right now, whereas design changes to the UI is something you would appreciate every single day. And do remember, Gurman has said that Apple's working on making iOS less buggy as well, so yeah, hopefully iOS 19 builds aren't too bad. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching.